Okay, so now that we learned how to use Beautiful Soup to extract specific element from a HTML page, let's see how we can extract all the nested elements within this element. So basically in HTML, every time you create an element or a tag, for example, you have the form tag here, you close it with a /form. So that's the end of it. And as you can see, when I put the mouse over here, it highlights the start and the end of the form in the actual HTML page. So this is the same if you look at the script in here. Even though this is a JavaScript, it doesn't get displayed on the screen. But as you can see, it starts with a script and it ends with a /script. Now, going back to our example, which is the form. Now, this is what we extracted. And as you can see, inside this element, so it's similar to when we have a function and we have code inside the body of this function, or we have a loop and we have code inside the body of the loop. In HTML, between the start of the tag and the end of the tag, you can put HTML code, and this code will be considered as part of this element. So inside this form, you can see that we have a table. And then inside this table, we have rows. So each tr in here is actually a row. And again, it starts with a tr, ends with a /tr. And then we also have inputs. Now, I'm talking a little bit too much about HTML, but I just want you to have a general idea of the syntax of HTML. Now, going back to the result displayed by our program, you can see we have a list. Because like I said, the code we used will extract all the forms in that page. So if there were more forms, we'll actually see them as elements to this list. We only have one form in the page, so therefore we only have one element. And again, as you can see, we don't only have the start of the element, we have the element plus all of the nested elements inside it, which are actually very, very interesting to us. So the first interesting thing is the action. Like I said, this is the page that this form gets submitted to. So if we ever want to submit this form, we have to submit it to index.php page equals dnslookup.php. Now, if we go up and look at the URL in here, this is the same as the URL, and you might think that this is not very important because it's the same as the URL, but in many scenarios, you will actually see a different URL in the action than the main URL. So it is very important for us to know the value for the action. Now, in our code, right now we are printing the forms list, which is basically a list in which each element is a form in the target HTML page. So let's assume that this list contains more than one element, and I want to access all of these elements because, like I said, we want to extract all the forms. Then what I'd do is I'd use a loop like we've seen before. So all we have to do is we're just going to do for form in my forms list. I want to print the form. Okay, so all we're doing is we're creating a new variable called form. It's gonna represent an element in this list, and then for each time we have an element, we're going to execute this code, and we're just printing the form. So if I clear this and run it again, as you can see, I have my form and I don't have the list start and end, which means that I am actually accessing this one specific element. So I'm accessing one element at a time. And this is something that we've seen before and we did a lot. Now, what I actually want to do is I want to start extracting the useful data from this form. So like I said, the first important thing is the action. And to extract any attribute like the action in here or like the method in here, even if it is in any other HTML element, for example, the style in here, all you have to do is put the name of the current element. So right now I'm in form and I want to get the action. Doesn't get any simpler than this. And I'm going to store this in a variable called action. And I'm going to print this. So if I run this now, you will see I have the action right here. Now, the next important thing that I want to get is the method. And again, this is an attribute inside the form tag. So I can extract it by saying my method is equal to form.get, and I want to get the method. Then again, I can print this, and if I run my code, you'll see that my method is post. Perfect. The next thing that we need in order to post the data is the names of the inputs. So we have the input in here, and we have another input in there. And the whole input is not really important to me. What's important to me is the name of the input. So the name attribute in the input. Remember, we used that in the guest login, and we set the name as the key of the dictionary, and we set the value to whatever value that we want. So that's the main reason why I need it in here, so that I can build up my dictionary and then submit the form. So far we know we can use the .get to get attributes and the find all to find actual elements. Now if you look at the input is not an attribute. It starts with this sign, and this means that it's an actual HTML element. So we're actually going to use the same syntax as this, and I'm going to say my inputs list is equal to my form, because the inputs, if we go back to where we were printing the form, the inputs are actually part of this form. So all of this is the form, and the inputs are in here and in here. So what I'm saying is my inputs list is equal to the form variable that contains all of the inputs, and I want to find all, and with the element that I want to find all occurrences of it is my input. And then again, exactly similar to what we're doing here, my inputs list is going to contain a list in which each element is an input inside the form. So I can iterate over it by doing for input in my input list. And then I can just print the input. And this should print the inputs for me. And as you can see, I have them in there. But like I said, the input is not really important to me. And what's important to me is the name of the input. So again, as you can see, the name is an attribute to an actual HTML element. So to access attributes, similar to what we're doing in here, we can say the input name is equal to input.get the name. And then I can just print the input name in here. And if I run this, as you can see, I have the input names, which are target host, and the other name, which we have in here. So going back to the top, we've actually kind of repeated ourselves in this code, but I wanted to make sure that you get the idea. Basically, all you have to do is, first of all, parse the HTML code using Beautiful Soup. This is stored in a variable. Then, every time you need to find an element, you use the find all element on this variable. So we were looking for forms. We got a list of forms. We iterated over each element in this list. Every time we need to access an attribute, so something similar to the class in here, or similar to the name, we do form.get. So we got the action, we got the method. And then when we wanted to get the inputs, these are actual HTML elements. So we can't use the .get to get them. But similar to the form, we use the find all method to find all the inputs in my current form. Then we iterated over them and we extracted the input names. So right now we have all the things that we need in order to submit this form. We already know how to post requests. We have the URL to post to because we extracted it from the action. And we have the names of the inputs. So all we have to do now is use the same post method that I showed you before in order to post this form. You'll have to do slight modifications before you do that, and I'll cover this in details in the next lecture.